Hi, good day everyone. I'm Dr. Sadika Khan, Program Dean for Interdisciplinary Studies and leading member of the newly formed Clotil Walcott Gender Hub here at Cipriani College for Labor and Continuing Studies. Joining me is Ms. L'Oreal Ramirez, another team member and our Quality Assurance Manager here at the college. And together we are pleased to have with us today two of Ms. Walcott's relatives, that is her daughter, Ms. Ida Le Blanc, and her granddaughter, Ms. Clotil Walcott. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
We are pleased to be here.
In preparation for the launch of this Gender Hub for our inaugural Gender Symposium next week, we believe that it is important that we recognize Clotil's contribution in the realm of decent work for Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of the available research that is on Clotil Walcott discusses her professional life and her achievements. But as a mother and as a member of her community, what can you tell us about her?
Well, Clotil was really an extraordinary woman. And it wasn't like she was just our mother. She was like everybody's mother.
Okay.
Because the way how she would operate within the community, you know, everybody will look up to her. And she was not a selfish woman. She always wanted to help people. You know, sometimes you pass and she find children looking like they don't have, or what she will call them and give them.
Right.
At 25 cents. Those days was 25 cents.
Right.
And even big people, she'll give them $3. And I said, Mommy, you can't give people, a big woman, so $3. She said, no, they were unhappy for that.
Right.
You know, and after she died, a woman came and was telling me that same story, how she was so happy sometime and Clotil meet her and will give her the little. Because she feel, even if she have a little, she could still share with other people.
Okay,
yes.
great. Yeah?
What I remember most is she said her house was the house of the people. And growing up with her, no matter who's in trouble or who needs somewhere, even if you need somewhere for a couple of days or a couple of months, we always had additional people in our house outside of family members, because she said it was the house of the people.
Right.
So she was always willing to assist people no matter what, whether it was friends, family, people in the movement. From time to time, we would have people at our house. The house of the people.
House of the people, I like that. Now, there is a quote that's attributed to her where she says, I became particularly concerned about the problems of working women being oppressed and exploited. To do this effectively, she says, I discovered that I had to be conversant with the problems of male workers, and that I therefore set out to improve my knowledge and education. Could you elaborate for me a little further about these early work experiences and its impact in shaping her activist lifestyle later?
Well, I remember Clotil, she did a lot of correspondence course.
Okay.
In trade unionism and, you know, the different things. She wanted to learn. Because I being there with her, at night she will be calling me because she was working in the factory. So at night she will take these courses. And she would be calling me all the time. Ida, what word is this? You know, how to spell this word?
Right.
And all that, you know. And so I had to be part of that correspondence course too.
Right.
So, you know, and I think that is what helped me to be more
inspired you.
interested in being a trade unionist and being part of the trade union movement.
Okay, great.
So it was a great learning experience growing up with somebody like Clotil Walcott. You know, but no one must be left behind. So she always included men.
Right.
You know, even so if it was more women coming to us. So people will watch it like, that is a woman organization.
Right.
But she always included men to hear what they had to say, because men were just as oppressed as women in society. Yes.
Right. Carla, you want to share anything with us?
Yeah, what I would remember is she was a factory worker, and a lot of the issues that she had at the factory would have stemmed from where she ended up at the end of the day.
Right.
A lot of the issues were that women had one salary and men had a different salary. And for her, I remember her saying, if the man could do that, I can do that too. And one of the things is that she fought at the factory level for equality in the workplace, because she's worked right alongside the men, but she didn't get the same pay as them. And I think all of that would have shaped how and where she ended up, because she fought for equality at the end of the day, because you can't be doing the same thing as the person next to you when you are getting a different pay.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is what would have shaped the person she was at the end of the day.
Right.
So I think that would have started off, and being at the factory level, there was a union involved at that point. And I think that would have contributed to her getting involved in the trade union movement as well.
All right, great.
Because that was the only way to get the same, for equality at the workplace, for equality at the factory.
Right.
The National Union of Domestic Employees, also known as NUDE, we have a number of members who have started a cooperative. The cooperative is the Service Workers Cooperative Center that employs domestic workers. One of the visions behind starting this cooperative center is that domestic workers can go out. A number of the issues that we have that have been reported to us is to address some of those issues. Things like no contract in the workplace, issues with NIS, because then the cooperative becomes the employer, and the cooperative also goes out and look for jobs for the domestic workers.
Okay.
So one of the things is that when you're sending a domestic worker to an environment, we show that what type of environment, we know what the contract is, what is happening, what are the entitlements. All of this is worked out before the domestic worker even steps into the household, and everything is documented. So the Service Workers Cooperative Center employs domestic workers and then negotiates the contract with the householder. So when they go to the workplace, they know exactly what they're going, what is happening. They have a job description, they have a written contract, so they know exactly what is happening. It eliminates a number of the problems that have been reported to us as grievances from the domestic workers.
So it's also operating like a sort of pseudo legal entity then?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And anything that might happen in the workplace, well, the employer will call the cooperative. So, you
Excellent,
know,
yeah.
the worker don't have to be studying, oh gosh, I don't know what to do or whatever.
So there's a voice then at
Yes,
agency.
yes.
Right, okay.
There's a voice to assist the domestic workers.
But what is the normal channel right now for domestic workers in terms of if they have to, if in a case of termination, what is the current channel that they have to access?
They have no channel to
They
access.
have no access.
Unless it's a minimum wages violation, there is no channel for them to access. You can't report a domestic worker to the ministry unless it's a violation of the Minimum Wages Act.
Okay.
So there are a number of domestic workers who have been terminated by employers because of a disagreement. They're arriving late at work. There are a number of issues that will come up from time to time. And the employer will simply terminate the domestic worker, and there's no redress for that. You would find in the Industrial Relations Act, there are a number of people who are not qualified as workers within the Act, but there are legislations that cover them, and they have a
Certain kinds of social protection.
Right, they have other means of addressing their issues. Whether it's to go to a tribunal, there are a number of issues, and there are organizations that represent them. But at the end of the day, for a domestic worker, there's no redress when it comes to termination.
Right.
That is why it's so important for the government to ratify the convention. And the thing is, if a domestic worker doesn't come out, because domestic work is so wide, you have from child care to adult care to, well, the Industrial Relations Act defines it as anybody who works in and around the household and is paid by the householder. So you have somebody from a gardener to somebody who is driving you out. And at the end of the day, if all of these people come together and they say that we are not working, then you cannot go out and do what you need to do. So it's so important for domestic workers to be for them to get to a stage where they can address all of their issues. It can't be that in 2024 you can raise particular issues and you can't raise at the end of the day if I am unfairly terminated by my employer. Right?
But you see what happened to domestic workers. It's so ashamed to say that they are domestic worker.
So that stigma still remains.
Yes, that still remains there. So that is what we had to fight and get rid of. But it is a hard thing to fight and get rid of.
And a lot of times, because it's not a work environment, you find that there's no documentation.
Right.
So a lot of times the workers would come, but they have no documentation as to what is happening with them.
Right.
So you would want that sort of documentation, whether the person has a contract or what is happening in the workplace, and to follow a particular procedure.
Correct.
It should not be that the rest of the country has means of addressing an issue, and this sector of workers are left behind. And I think that is where Clotil would have seen the issues coming forward, and that is what she would have rallied around and tried to address those issues.
Now, here's another thing. We have an issue here in Trinidad and Tobago where we have a number of undocumented persons who are operating within the domestic. What, if any, has NUDE been able to do in terms of helping them or manage that? I mean, do you all have any kind of procedure or anything like that to assist such people?
Well,
If they are coming through CSME, there are forms that they will have to fill out. And they have to go through whether or not they're certified in their country or they have to be certified here. There's a process that we can address and assist them with that process. If it's general workers, I don't.
Well,
Miss Ida would have to answer that.
Yes, I took up cases already.
Like I'm talking about like people who are undocumented, like for example, migrants and whatnot,
they're not,
and refugees.
So sometimes, and I have to go to the Ministry of Labor, they wouldn't come.
Right.
But the parents might come, or some family member, and I get them to go in conciliation with me, and I talk about it.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, the employer mightn't come neither.
Right.
You know, so we come up with a settlement, what we're looking forward to. And in some instances, not all, we were able to get payment for the domestic worker.
Yeah, because
You know?
I know that, like, for example, with the influx and the exodus of Venezuelan refugees into the country, I know a lot of them would have entered domestic work as a means of trying to, survive.
Yes, that's caregiving.
And caregiving. So, I mean, I know this is something, I mean, what steps, or is there any sort of framework or anything that you would have all
But the thing-
considered about in relation to that?
The thing with that is that
Because I know it's going to be really
the
complicated.
language
Right, so language is a barrier.
big problem.
Yeah, right.
Because Venezuelan came to me already, but I don't know what they're telling me. And
Right. So there's a language
so
barrier.
yes,
Right.
a big barrier in getting help for them.
Yes.
So all I will do, I will refer them to go to the Catholic board, the church
Okay.
or whatever,
All right.
and there they will seek help.
Help. All right.
Yes, but
Okay. Yeah,
that is
well,
all we can
those
do
are just
for
some
them.
other things
I know
wanted
that
to
you
invite.
mentioned that this year is the 50th anniversary. In what way is NUDE planning to
Celebrate
commemorate it this year?
and commemorate.
Yes, we want to celebrate it because usually we keep, but not every year, we keep Clotil Walcott Day. That is the 7th of September. That is on her birthday.
Okay. All right.
You know, we celebrate that, keep a function and things like that. But we want to invite people from abroad who has been helping Clotil, you know, because she had her people from abroad who really stood up with
Yes,
her. For example, Selma James,
Right.
you know, and all the other people in the Wages for Household campaign, because they themselves started us with this the global strike, and we continue to keep it on International Women's Day. We'll put on our T-shirt.
Right.
In the back we have pay women, not the military, because instead of yourself to pay people to go to war, pay people who doing all this work in the home, and we're trying to bring attention to that. You know, and what I see happening is all over the world now, people talking about this global strike. So we're hoping one day that we really could go on strike, and women will just not go to work, and they will see how powerful and important woman is in society, you know.
Ms. Walcott is commonly associated with several achievements. The first I'd like to focus on is the establishment of NUDE, the National Union of Domestic Employees, in 1974. What can you tell us about how she came to be seen as a pioneer and a voice of the invisible worker, that is, the domestic workers?
Well, she started off dealing with the domestic workers because they were the workers that would come to her.
Okay.
Right? Because she started the union in her home. and people would come to her home. She got her desk and her chair where she will sit there and have all her files on people who come to her and things like that. So she would deal with these workers.
One of the things is that she never let where she was or what was happening with her stop her from dealing with the issues of the trade union issues, I should say. Anybody come to her, no matter what it is, she would try to assist the person. She would have recognized at some point in time there would have been an inequality within the legislation because the legislation would have covered certain categories of workers.
Right.
The Industrial Relations Act has a number of people who are not workers within the legislation. However, there are additional legislation that would cover.
Right.
And I can give you an example. Like you have teachers are not workers within the meaning of the Act, but there's the Teaching Service Act.
Correct.
So there are other legislations that covers the majority of, covers all the other sectors of workers, excepting for domestic workers. The only thing domestic workers have is the Minimum Wages Act, where there is a household assistant order which gives them certain rights.
Certain rights. Yes.
However, if a domestic worker is terminated, they don't have the right to redress at the end of the day. You have the right of the minimum wage, you have rights of maternity protection, but you don't have the right if you are terminated. And a lot of workers would have come to her because of what that situation is. Additionally, I can only speak on this just broadly. Ida would give you more context of that. Her mother was a domestic worker.
Right.
And she would have grown up in that environment and seen what would have happened to her mother. Unfortunately, I did not know her. But I think with that and with what she was dealing with in the workplace, that would have shaped a lot of what she was doing and a lot of what was happening with her. And leading up to the point where she realized that domestic workers were not I don't know if not being covered by, or they were not a sector of workers that had a union and have a union to lobby for them and represent them at the end of the day. So I think all of that would have come from there, basically.
Yes, and she started all that in 1974, so this year will make it 50 years since the union has been existing. Yeah. And I don't want to leave out Brother Lynch, James Lynch.
Right, one of the founding.
Right, he was there with encouraging Clotil. You say, encourage me too. You had to learn, you had to go and get, do courses and things like that. To him, education was so important. And Clotil really paved the way for me to try to educate myself. You know, even at I have to say old age, I still believe in education, and if there is a free course, not one to pay, I will always be involved in that.
And what would you say is like the biggest achievement that NUDE has managed to accomplish for domestic workers? What's your pride and joy with regard to NUDE?
I can't find it right now, you know, because remember, domestic workers, well, they covered under the Maternity Protection Act. We fought for that. Right? And they have a household assistant order under the minimum wages order. But we have been fighting for the recognition of domestic workers. Both Carla and I went to Geneva for a couple of years. Every year we would attend the ILO conference there and with other. And that time it only had a few people who was involved in domestic workers around the world. Right. And we would fight for domestic workers there, and we were able to get the Convention 189. You know, so we continue to lobby here in Trinidad and Tobago to get that convention ratified. Correct. But to date, nothing has happened. You know, so we had to renew our energies and spirit in getting this convention ratified because it is important. But even when we look at the convention, we see a few things that we already have. So I don't see why we can't ratify it. You know, because there are still other things, especially for sleeping workers. Right. You know, domestic workers who sleep in, they still face difficulties, you know, and especially the migrant workers. Because one worker reported to me how the employer put her out in the night. you know, and we don't have no safe houses and things like that like other countries where the domestic workers could go and stay and spend the night and, you know, to be safe.
Yeah.
So we continue to see as a union what we can do because we are now involved, and I am an executive member of the International Domestic Workers Federation, and we represent the Caribbean.
Right.
I and another comrade from Jamaica.
Okay.
We represent the Caribbean because what we are trying now to do is to build a stronger unit in the Caribbean itself.
Yes.
That is what
Right.
we want to see.
Right.
You mentioned, you segued nicely into the next question. Some of the big wins for Clotil through NUDE were the passing, as you mentioned, of the minimum wages and terms and conditions of service for household assistance order, as well as the passing of the Unremunerated Work Act in 1995. What are some of her lesser known achievements that you think you want us to bring to light?
Some of our achievement. Well, the thing is that we have the Unremunerated Work Act, and I boast about it every time I travel, because now a lot of people, when they didn't want to hear about unpaid work, now everybody's speaking about unpaid work,
Right.
you know, and I always talk about we are the only country, first country, to have the Unremunerated Work Act. So what I would like to see is that government implementing the Unremunerated Work Act, because it have clauses in it that, you know, what government had to take up with regards to statistics and how it and compensation and things like that, because we really want to see housewives being paid for all this unpaid work that they're contributing to society, you know, and also to the economy, because we feel that they're just contributing to the home alone, but it's the whole society, you know, in unpaid work, and that should be, they should be paid for that. It's through Social Security.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know, we already start giving people Social Security, but you have to reach a certain age, or you have to be disabled, you know. But for what they're doing for this country, they should be paid for it, because it's not an easy job.
Now, you were mentioning here in that conversation a lot of challenges that you're having. What are some of the challenges that you had when you took up her mantle after she died? What are some of the kinds of big challenges that you faced?
Well, it was a little better than what she was doing, but it is about nearly the same, but color was wrong at that time, so you could maybe add on to something.
I think the profession of the trade union is really what have been in the past an area where you would see a lot of men in. So for a small trade union coming up with a female president and all-female executive, it would have been hard. But that did not stop NUDE from continuing the work that Clotil had started. And that did not deter us from having a vision, a long-term vision, as well as a short-term vision for the union. So we pioneered through everything. It was not easy. NUDE would have eventually joined NATUC. And we still pioneered through all the difficulties that we had,
Right.
to make sure that we had a voice out there. And that's how we ended up with the convention, because we went to the ILO. We would have lobbied, we would have fought, we would have argued with a number of people about whether or not this convention should pass, even though Trinidad has not ratified the convention. From moving to where somebody's not recognized to having something in the Minimum Wages Act, and then additionally you have a convention now that speaks to
Domestic workers.
domestic workers. That in itself is a great achievement, and that would have shown some of the work that we would have put down over the years.
Yes, yes. And I want to commend, you know, that, because I know based on the readings that I've done, Clotil herself faced so many challenges in trying to, you know, bring things together. I mean, I read about how, you know, she faced the problems with publication. So she took it upon herself to learn how to do this by herself. So she learned how to type. she did the, and then she was selling her publications for 50 cents
Yeah, she
door
did.
by door. And I mean, that is like, and not only that, in all the meetings that she attended, you either would have been there along with your other siblings, hand in hand with her. That could not have been easy. You know, so I mean, it just goes to show that despite all of those hurdles and struggles, not having tertiary education or not being able to have certain kinds of support systems available, she just rallied through everything.
Yes.
All right, and I think that has to be commended. But Carla, with the work that you are doing now in IR, to what extent would you say that it's continuing Clotil's legacy, or are you taking things in a different direction?
I would say that it's a bit of both. At the end of the day, we continue to represent workers. It's important that, and I don't mean this in any bad way, we have a lot of big unions in Trinidad who do not necessarily do what we refer to as off-the-street cases.
Right.
So when somebody's not part of a large bargaining unit, you can still come to NUDE and get representation at the end of the day. You still have somewhere to go and get advice. Over the years, we have worked with a number of agencies. You would be aware that domestic workers are part of the categories of workers through CSME that can move freely within the Caribbean,
Yes.
and that they have to be certified. NUDE has developed a certification with the National Training Agency for
And the
domestic workers, and the ILO for domestic workers. And so we're welcoming people into Trinidad, and we can assist them through that process. But additionally, I think the area has expanded in terms of not just representing workers at the level of the ministry and at the court, but you have where you can advise workers when they're coming to Trinidad, this is what you have to do. This is where you have to go. And if you are not certified, this is how you get certified. And we have developed the certification. We have been part of the development of the certification for domestic workers. So people who are coming in, people who are here, and you want to be certified. And additionally, when you do this training, now you have a negotiation tool with your employer to negotiate, because you're saying that you are skilled in this particular field. And additionally, NUDE has also developed a contract with the assistance of the ILO, because a lot of times the problems that domestic workers face is that you're going into a workplace, but the employer says, I want you to do all of these things, but
Right.
you have in your mind, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And a lot of times the issues arrive where there's a difference of opinion. But then when you have this when you have something documented
A
now,
framework.
right, exactly, a framework, then it minimizes the amount of grievances that take place within the workplace. And then sometimes you go in and you have, the employer says to you, this is your salary, but when you start to work, something else happens.
Right.
When you have a written contract, you eliminate some of the issues that comes up in the workplace.
Right.
So I think that as well is a great achievement for NUDE.
And Carla, as you were speaking, you all have been doing some tremendous work. What would you say is the way forward? And in terms of Clotil's legacy, what do you think still remains to be done?
Including domestic workers in the Industrial Relations Act. That remains to be seen, because a lot of times the issues with a lot of domestic workers that we can pick up has to be violations of the Minimum Wages Act.
Right.
If a domestic worker is terminated or fired, you can't just pick up those issues. There are issues in terms of maternity protection that we can pick up. There are other issues with overtime, vacation leave, sick leave. You can pick up those issues. But when it comes to termination, you cannot pick up that issue. I think that is what remains to be seen. That is why NUDE is constantly pushing for the ratification of the convention, because that addresses a lot of the issues within the convention. Will address the issues that we have currently, and I think those are the issues that we would have to focus on going forward.
Okay.
And we had also lobbied the CEDAW, Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and they had made a recommendation to government some years ago, about 5 or 6 years, well, before COVID.
Right.
And they call on government to amend the IRA to include domestic workers.
Okay. All right.
But
Great.
then the COVID came about and everything just fall, you know, so we now have to renew our energy with regards to calling on government to to see what...
Make it a priority.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, Clotil has been described in so many ways in the research. And I think the one that stays with me is the one by Professor Rhoda Reddock when she did her tribute to her. And she called Clotil a proletarian intellectual. How would you, Ida and Carla, describe Clotil Walcott in terms of summing up her legacy and her contribution to decent work? If you had to find a phrase to describe.
For me, she was about equality and justice at the end of the day. She wanted everybody to have a fair, I would say like a fair share of whatever is happening. It's not that she wanted anybody to be superior or anybody to be left behind. What she really wanted was equality at the end of the day. She saw where there was a lack within the legislation and that people could not get the same justice at the end of the day. If something goes wrong, then you don't have equality at the end of the day. And for me, that is what I would take away from her legacy, that she was somebody about equality and justice.
Yes. And she really was for the poor working class as herself, because even if Clotil wasn't invited to a convention or whatever, conference, she would go and she would demand she have to be in there, because they might say, but your name not here. No, I have to get in there. I have to go there. You know, and she will walk in. She don't care. You have to send police to take her out. And still the police might be able to take her out. So that was the kind of woman she was, you know.
So would you say then, would I be accurate if I describe her as a pioneer and a warrior for inclusiveness and equity then?
Sure.
Yeah? All right. So, I mean, as we bring our interview to a close, I just want to say on behalf of the board and management of the college, I just want to thank you for coming here, taking your time off, sharing these valuable insights about Clotil Walcott, and thank you very much for everything that you've done.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you.